So here we are, the beginning of the Second Doctor's era. With this big change to the lead role, beginning of this new incarnations era with the Dalek serial was a great idea. While Dalek Mania was fizzling out at this time, there was still a big pull, so using their presence to keep viewers hooked while this change-up occurred was a good move to help preserve the audience while going through this transition. With this big change there is a lot to talk about, and that's not even considering the plot of the serial itself, which is considered to be one of the greatest Dalek stories in the show's history. But obviously being the first post-renewal story and a Dalek story, it's missing in its entirety. Although due to the importance of this serial, there are many surviving clips taken from other shows and plenty of off-air recordings, so a surprising amount survives for an entirely missing serial without any censor clips. But let's finish talking about the lack of a serial and begin talking about the serial itself. There's a lot to cover, so let's begin with the obvious. We begin at the South Pole with the Doctor's renewal being recapped. From there we get introduced to the new incarnation of the Doctor, who is acting incredibly oddly, being a bit all over the place and talking in the third person, referring to the Doctor as if he was a different man. It's a very strange scene as he doesn't acknowledge his companions for a bit, and they just have to sort of watch as he stumbles about. Of course Ben is the one whose distrust of the Doctor is on show, while Polly just sort of goes along with it, seemingly knowing it's the Doctor just because. Ben tries to prove that this man isn't the Doctor by using the Doctor's ring, which fell off when he stood up, saying that since the Doctor always wore the ring, if he really is the Doctor, then it should fit him, despite already having fallen off his finger. But anyway, the ring of course doesn't fit, which the Doctor explains as,
"There, that settles it. I'd like to see a butterfly fit into a chrysalis case after it spread its wings."
This is what leads into the most the Doctor explains about his renewal, of course not giving it a name, but alluding it to being called the renewal, and saying it's a part of the TARDIS, allowing for him to survive. Beyond that we don't learn a lot about this process, but it seemingly can alter the clothing of the Doctor as well, as he's wearing a very different outfit to his previous incarnation, with him only lacking a jacket which he soon pulls out from a chest. Despite being the same character, there is an interesting relationship between the two different incarnations. Apart from the Doctor referring to his predecessor in the third person, he seems to be acting as if he's adopting the memories and identity of his predecessor. He has fragments of memories, pulling out a dagger from the chest, which leads to him mentioning Saladin and the Crusade, referring to the Doctor as a great collector. But this is kind of funny as he never met Saladin in that serial. But more notably, and relevant to the serial, a piece of metal which has some connection to the Daleks, as when seeing it he says,
"Extermination."
And of course we get our first look of the Doctor's diary, which on several occasions throughout, the Doctor reads as if he's learning about who he once was, to put who he is together. This entire opening scene sort of builds a mystery around the Doctor, whether or not he still is the same person, with Ben being insistent he is someone different. But of course the Doctor's oddities do continue into the rest of the serial, especially in the earlier sections in which he often plays his recorder instead of actually talking with his companions. I think it's the cliffhanger which really shows that the Doctor is the same man but shuffled around, as when the trio meet the dead Daleks, the Doctor demonstrates an understanding of how dangerous they can be, but acts far more cautiously than his predecessor. Although this caution around the Daleks is present throughout episode 1, as he clearly knows how to open the ship up, even having the equipment needed in his pocket, this being the piece of metal. But he doesn't push any further than he must when entering. The first Doctor would probably insist on entering the inner chamber to find out if there were any Daleks inside, but this incarnation knows when to hold back. This change in personality does extend to beyond just how he interacts with the Daleks though, as the Doctor often now stands around and examines people as they talk, getting an idea of them. Rather than being a large presence who you should acknowledge, the Doctor keeps in the background until he is needed, examining the situation and inserting himself when necessary. This is something expanded on as this era continues, but right now it's an immediate distinction between the two incarnations, so I should probably start talking about the actual plot itself instead of just the new Doctor. So with our new Doctor, the TARDIS lands on the planet Vulcan, home to a human colony and not the pointed-eared aliens. I do want to briefly discuss the placement of this planet because where it is in the universe isn't specified. I believe the novelisation states a location, but there is dialogue in the episode which implies it might be the once hypothetical planet Vulcan. For a little context, the planet Vulcan was a hypothetical planet which its existence was calculated to explain irregularities in the orbit of Mercury. Now obviously Vulcan doesn't exist, but for some time was considered to be the closest planet to the Sun. So while it's not stated directly in the serial, if this Vulcan is that planet, there is a line which talks about how ships from Earth almost always overshoot, which for a planet that orbits closely to the Sun, its immense gravity well would lead to this. I mean this is all up to the viewer's interpretation, but I do quite like the idea of Vulcan existing in the Doctor Who universe, sort of a slight change between our reality and the show's. But anyway, the Doctor witnesses the murder of the Examiner, who was summoned to the colony, then through a misunderstanding is thought to be the Examiner, and so decides to examine the colony to find out who murdered the Examiner. This of course leads to the discovery that the colony has uncovered a Dalek ship in one of the acid lakes, this being by a scientist named Lesterson. This gives us the episode 1 cliffhanger with the Doctor, Ben and Polly sneaking out during the night to enter the inner chamber of the Dalek ship.
Polly, babe, come in and meet the Daleks.
This also gives us our first hint of what a Dalek mutant looks like, with the serial going all in on showing us the mutants which have only been teased before, with them being a lot more blobby than the clawed creatures hinted at in the Daleks. From there, the next few episodes follow the resurrection of the dead Daleks by Lesterson, and them pretending to be good so they can get the resources to build their forces, acting as the servants of the colony.
The thing it does most efficiently is exterminate human beings. It destroys them without mercy, without conscience. It destroys them utterly, completely. Destroys them. I am your servant.
These Daleks have been reverted to the original static-powered Daleks, so that they are limited, needing power from the colony to sustain themselves until they can place power cables to use their own power. They also lack weapons for the majority of the runtime, which does make them look very strange, and does make them vulnerable, as on so many occasions you can feel them wanting to kill someone, but don't have the power to. The story really takes the Daleks back to their original versions, which were manipulating geniuses, having to play as servants to gain what they need. The Daleks are forced to use their intelligence to understand the colony and make their moves without anyone noticing, made harder for them by the appearance of the Doctor. Notably, when they begin to reproduce, they make it clear that they cannot be seen in groups larger than 3, as to keep up the facade that there are only 3 of them, but the Doctor soon discovers this when seeing a Dalek in the Governor's office and then 3 in the corridor right after. There's a slow build up to the Daleks slaughtering the colony, with only 1 death in episode 2 and then nothing until episode 6 when they declare war on the colony and kill almost everyone. Apparently Terry Nation wasn't too impressed with this, thinking the Daleks were too kind, which does make me think he wasn't paying much attention to the serial when viewing it. Because the Daleks playing nice is what makes them so scary. Somewhat reflecting the Doctor, they're holding back and waiting for their moment. Neither wants to play their hand and show off their power until they can make their ultimate move. The Doctor also spends time trying to understand the weakness of the Daleks, at one point trying to shut down their power with Lesterson having to save them. The Daleks are so incredibly vulnerable at the beginning, but slowly work their way back up to their full power, which makes them more and more threatening as the serial goes on. I haven't actually touched on the colony itself, but it's incredibly well fleshed out. The colony is imperfect, with many flaws which have caused the rebel group to form, who wish to use the Daleks to take control of the colony. In fact, since the Daleks don't show up until the cliffhanger, there is a sense for a bit that the serial could just be about the colony's politics and the forming rebellion, rather than an alien threat. But even so, these two threads are woven together incredibly well. The Daleks pretending to assist the rebels as a part of their ruse, having their weapons returned but with an external control so they can't operate it themselves without a rebel controlling them. Of course this is due to the colonists believing the Daleks to just be robots, something even Lesterson believed until the end of episode 4 when he uncovers them creating new Daleks, something so terrifying that it sends him mad for the remainder of the serial. So the rebel group was created by Bragan, with his importance to it being kept secret for the majority of the serial's run. Until this reveal, our main rebel is Janely, who is the assistant of Lesterson, so has access to the Daleks, which is how she is able to bring them into the action. She's quite an interesting character, obviously starting off as who the audience view as the leader of the rebels, with her giving the orders and arranging events, but even once the reveal of Bragan happens, she is still very important as a leader figure. Her dynamic with Lesterson is also great, with her often manipulating him subtly so she can get what the rebels need. The most notable moment of this is when a Dalek kills someone during the early tests. She pretends that he was only injured so she can keep Lesterson working on the Daleks, and later uses his death to keep Lesterson in line. We also have Quinn, who is the man who had contacted Earth to send the Examiner to the colony. This is due to how badly Hensel was handling the situation, which can be seen in the serial, notably when he returns after a tour of the colony and Bragan has taken over. During the few days he was away, Bragan took over completely, with him changing over the guard and making it as if Hensel was never the governor of the colony, with the guards not even acknowledging him. Hensel feels very passive within the plot, not preventing events which leads to the reawakening of the Daleks. I don't have much to say about Hensel as he spends a lot of time off screen, but his mishandling of the colony is what leads to the mass slaughter in episode 6. So back to Quinn. He gets framed for the murder of the Examiner before revealing he was the one who contacted Earth. This is one of the moments which also hints at Bragan being involved with the rebel group, as it's him who sets up the situation to frame Quinn. Quinn doesn't do much beyond this. He is the fellow prisoner of the Doctor towards the end and plays a part in their escape, but that's sort of it. I haven't talked much about Ben and Polly, which isn't because they're especially boring, but I think after episode 1, when the plot really gets going, they feel less interesting than they previously were, which is also an effect of the Doctor being a far more active element in the serial. While Ben and Polly were basically holding Template together, here they each get captured at some point so that Michael Craze and Annika Wills could have a holiday, which given how important this serial is in terms of keeping the audience outside, it feels a bit risky to shuffle the trio up like this in 2 episodes. I'm guessing the holidays were secured before the renewal was decided on, which could explain this happening at such a risky moment, but these were also the earliest holidays in the show, at weeks 8 and 9 of the production block. There's probably some technical reasons with contracts to explain why this happened, but it still feels odd. Although I do find it funny that each gets kidnapped or captured so they can spend a chunk of their next episode getting out of that situation and back into the action. I suppose all that's left is wrapping up the plot and seeing how the Doctor defeats the Daleks and saves the colony. So with the Daleks still relying on an external power unit, the Doctor sabotages it, causing the Daleks to all explode. A very simple solution, but since the power unit is next to the Dalek ship, it means that gaining access to it is extremely difficult. Of course they succeed with the destruction of the Daleks, and Quinn is put in charge of the colony as the new governor. So the last thing to discuss is the scripting of the serial, as this serial is credited to David Whittaker, but had uncredited rewrites by Dennis Spooner. These rewrites were ordered by Sidney Newman, who thought the Doctor was being written wrong. But it seems that Spooner did more than just rework the Doctor, because for as highly as I think of Whittaker's serials, plot has never been his thing, and this serial has one of the strongest plots in the show. Now I have no proof to back this up, but while there is stuff that is clearly Whittaker's in the script, the strength of the plot does feel like Spooner's work. But the overall point to take away from this is that the serial was amazing and didn't involve Nation, who thought the Daleks were too nice. Overall, well I say overall, but this serial is one of the greatest, at least of the black and white era. While the Doctor's earlier scenes are a bit strange, and both Ben and Polly are far less used than in their previous serials, the majority of the serial has incredibly strong plotting and some amazing moments for the new Doctor. The Daleks feel more dangerous than they have ever before, drawing from their earliest characterisation and taking that to the next level, and making it even stronger. Out of all the missing serials in the show's early years, this is almost certainly the one which people want back the most. The first serial of the first new incarnation, and one of the greatest Dalek stories of all time. Everything works so well. But next time, the TARDIS lands in 18th century Scotland in the middle of a war between the Highlanders and the Redcoats. The trio get mixed up in events as they try to escape, but won't remain a trio for much longer. Next time, the Highlanders.